Okay, so in the second part of this exercise for today, we're going to look at how to work with audio inside of After Effects, and again, how to make a round-trip edit in Audition. Uh, so with our particular piece here, we were just working with masking effects. And again, for this part of the exercise, we don't really need any visual media to aid in understanding how to work with the audio at this point. So I'm just going to take all these layers and turn them off by just clicking and dragging down the visibility line on the far left of the screen for my layers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my project window panel, and I'm going to grab my audio assets out of the project panel. So we're going to start off by getting anything that it's called .wave. There should be 3 of those listed in there. I'm going to grab all of those and put them at the top of my timeline. And then you can also grab the MOV files to add them to the top of your timeline as well. We'll talk about, again, sort of removing audio from video to understand it separately. So you should have 3 WAV files and 2 MOV files imported into your timeline at this stage. And just to talk about working with audio in your project, again, audio for our project represents the foundation design portion for our pipeline or workflow for the project. Because we really want to have that designed well before we start dropping in video files and digital images that we want to animate or digital graphics that we want to animate. This is more typical workflow when working on animation. Typically, if you're working on a film and video project, you might actually be starting out with looking at the script, developing the cinematography, and shooting all the work. And the music can be added later in post-production, following the recording of all the video media and getting that arranged on a timeline. However, for our purposes with working with animation, it is much easier to align imagery with what's occurring in the audio rather than trying to do it the other way around. Much more difficult synchronizing those two up for our purposes or end goal. All right. So let's look at audio. Now, just as a quick note, we don't need our transfer modes turned on at the bottom left corner of After Effects. So if you still have transfer modes on that show like the blending mode and the track matte options, go ahead and turn off that little icon so that you're not wasting visual space inside of After Effects. It's a little more important in my screen because I don't have a whole lot of space with the projector here. So I try to make the most of what I've got. But now that I got that closed out, I can start working with my audio. Now, when working with audio clips or video clips for that matter, you're arranging them in the timeline is not that unusual. We've talked a little bit about this so far from the first exercise with working in the timeline. We understand that we can click on the actual track bars that are listed in the timeline, and we can drag them around to reposition them. Each of those bars in the timeline do represent a duration of time. That's why they're all in different lengths compared to each other for your audio clips. So they do represent a certain distance or duration of time. Another thing we can notice, like when looking at audio-based layers, if you unfold that or expand its properties for any of your audio layers, go ahead and expand it down so you can see its properties. And I'm going to pick a layer I can actually see something on. So I'm going to go to this one that says Module Elements. And I'm going to expand it down, and so it gives you a few options. The first property that you come up on is something called Audio Levels. Audio levels is actually, that's basically your volume control for your piece. It's measured in decibel, dB. And this allows you to control audio for that individual clip. Now, moving down from that, you'll also notice that you have a waveform viewer. So you can actually view the actual physical frequency waveform for an audio clip or audio clip data in a file, which you can also look at with video files if there's audio recorded with your video, which there usually is. So what we're seeing right now is actually an audio representation. If you recall from us discussing audio way back with the research section on time-based media, the audio waveform is generally based on a measurement of frequencies and audio levels or volume across time. So each of these little bars or vertical lines that you see represented here show hills and valleys that represent quiet and loud sounds. Now if we want to zoom in on this audio to kind of see it more separated, because right now it's kind of all clustered together, if you want to zoom in on it, position your playhead over the audio by clicking in your time ruler at the top and position it right over the middle of the audio. And then come down below your timeline and there's these two little icons for zooming in and out that look like mountains. You can actually click on those icons to zoom in on your timeline and it will stretch out or show you a close-up of your audio wave file. And then you can click up here on the top of your timeline, this little tiny skinny gray bar. You can grab that and navigate back and forth to see the different parts of your waveform in detail. So you can kind of see now in detail what the audio is actually doing over time and how it spikes or changes in audio level. And this is important to know, like especially when you're working with animating and trying to understand where can I queue up animation to change over time with an audio clip. And quite simply, it's just looking at the differences in the volume levels. Often those are indications for different sounds being cued or different changes in effects inside the sounds. So here's where we come to previewing our audio while we're looking at it in the timeline. So we've had a chance to look at it. Now let's go ahead and say we want to preview it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom back out on my timeline, by the way, real quick. And I'm going to shorten my render work area bar, which is this fat gray bar below my time ruler, and grab one of the blue handles here on the edge. And I'm going to shorten it down to where it only shows the span of time over my audio clip. That way I don't have to wait for After Effects to render everything inside of After Effects. Also, if I'm just previewing this clip of audio, I can use a switch on the layer to solo the track so that I don't have to render video or anything else. So come over here to the far left, and there should be an empty box next to your speaker icon that's for solo, track soloing. If you click on it, it should fill it in with a white circle. And that will allow you to solo just that track for the preview, or in this case for the audio preview. So you always want to make sure you have like headphones plugged in, volume is at a reasonable level for you to hear it. Hopefully at about mid volume should be enough. And when you hit spacebar, it should start a playback. So if you're listening to this, you should get kind of a trippy matrix kind of effect out of this audio at this point from the abstract clip that you're listening to. All right, we're going to stop that. But you should get a preview for what the audio track is doing. And again, when you're previewing and listening to audio, that's where it becomes important to listen to it while looking at the form when you're zoomed in, because it gives you a little bit more of a clear indicator as to what's occurring in the audio during specific parts. So what this little dip here in this waveform shows me at the beginning is that this is a dip in the audio rising up. Or at the very beginning, right? It kind of ramps up visually right here. It goes from nothing into full-sized waves or lines. And so that tells me that the audio is slowly getting louder over time. And likewise, it'll do something similar at the end here. It actually tapers off and gets quieter and quieter and quieter over a period of about 6 seconds. So just so you can kind of see what's going on with an audio wave as you watch it. is very important. Again, for kind of understanding the audio, but also seeing how you can use it to your advantage for mapping out synchronized movements or animations or transitioning video clips onto screen. All right, so we took a close-up look at it. We also previewed some of the audio. What I want you to also notice when you're listening to audio in After Effects, there's a big factor you need to understand for audio listening. Your earphones or sometimes even your studio headphones can be deceiving. The key reason is that when you're plugging directly into a device like this and not plugging into a main mixing board or something that actually gives you a direct output for what the audio is outputting through speakers, is that often what we hear is adjusted by a separate volume tool, and it does not represent accurate volume. Here's how you can see the difference. There's a panel in After Effects called Audio up in the upper right of your interface. So look up in the upper right panels, and you should see one called Audio. Go ahead and make sure that thing's visible on screen. It should look like this, nice little color bar over here with some sliders. Measured out in decibels and volume units. So what we're going to do is as we listen to our audio back through, this time I want you to watch that audio level screen to see how it visualizes and actually tracks the real audio. So in spite of the fact that I have my volume turned up to halfway and it sounds fairly loud through my own speaker, the actual levels that this audio is playing at is right around there. So I can see what it's actually doing during that time or during that sort of particular area of the track. And those peak levels that audio actually shows on that meter are accurate. I can actually mute my speaker on my computer and do the playback again. And notice that the audio levels still play where they were a second ago. That is why it is more important to watch this instead of what your ears are telling you. Because your ears can often be deceptive, and so can the earphones you're listening through. Or actually the speakers on the computer itself. Always watch this meter to make sure it's giving you what it should. To understand appropriate audio playback levels on this meter, generally speaking, your highest volume levels should reach no higher than the yellows inside this meter. That's pretty loud. When it shows about 6 plus 6 on the decibel level, or even -6 on the volume level, that's good enough for loud volume. When you start peaking up here where it gets to the -3 on the volume or the 9.0 on the decibel and higher, you start getting what's called audio clipping, and the frequency quality of the audio starts to reduce dramatically. You start losing quality, you can't get all the noise, and it's way too loud for anybody to want to listen to. So unless you're trying to create with dramatic effect, like really loud, obnoxious popping audio that blows out the speakers, right? You want to make sure that the levels play respectively a little bit lower. Again, the highest level for any chunk of audio you're listening to shouldn't peak past a 6 on here, a 6 decibel range. If your audio does, for instance, if you're listening to it and it gets anywhere above that level for any reason, you can use your independent audio level for your track to adjust the audio levels for that track you're working on. And that's just using the audio property here. So I could take this and drag it down, and notice as I drag it down that my waveform also gets skinnier because I'm dropping all of the respective audio overall for the entire track. You may notice that Audio Levels has a stopwatch on it, and if you recall from our last time together with Animation Basics, that you can use anything with a stopwatch property to animate over time. So I can actually animate my volume control for an individual layer if I need to over time. Again, to help reduce audio for loud sections or to boost audio for very quiet areas that I don't want to remain quiet. Otherwise, I can just drag it up to let it be universally louder if necessary. But be careful how much you boost it. If I take this thing up to like +8 over here on the audio level, notice the size of that waveform. It's now peaking at the top of the line. If I play this back, I'm just going to bring this down. See how that meter peaks way up there in the reds? Not good. And it's actually, it's too loud for it. But you can instantly see how it's being affected. So you want to be careful with stuff like that when you're changing audio levels. Always refer back to your audio panel to make sure that you are not clipping audio and that you are not maxing out. Now, when working with the audio level, another thing to keep in mind is if you have lots of audio playing at the same time, like you've layered it up to kind of create an ambient soundscape, you do need to make sure that you are hearing all of those other sounds. It's very easy to drown out individual sounds when you have a single audio layer that is very loud and obnoxious. Everything else can be drowned out instantly. So it does become important to create balance in that audio. So this is where you look at your respective audio channels and you turn them on, and I would solo them together. So like solo your audio tracks all together to make sure you're hearing all of them at once. And again, kind of respectively listening to see if you can hear the different effects playing on all the other layers. Now there's a light little bass line that plays behind that. You might have heard there's a little bit of an upright, kind of smooth bass sound. That comes from this layer right here. And it plays for a minute. It does combat a little bit with that main track layer, module layer. So I may have to, again, like dragging down the audio quality for one layer to help support your layer might be important. But again, you always want to listen to that stuff over and over again, making sure that the levels are fairly balanced. Making sure nothing's peaking too loud and nothing is too low. Another thing to keep in mind about this audio panel meter is if the audio is way down in the lower dark green areas, it's probably too quiet, in which case you need to bring up the volume. The decibels start measuring about 0, which is normal audio, at about midway through that meter. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to your audio track. Anything that's playing way below that is going to be really quiet. So unless that's your intention, you may need to boost it up a little bit to keep it, give it enough presence. Some tricks to playing with audio inside the timeline. One of the key tricks when working with audio in here, when you're first working with a clip, before you even start arranging it in the timeline, is to trim off any excess junk from the layer. So clipping its in and out points. So to do that, if you've already got it in your timeline like we do, it's pretty easy. We can just go to the layer and double click on the name of the layer. Go ahead and do that on your file. And you should notice pop up on screen a new tab that pops up over the top of your comp window for whatever layer you double clicked on. And it should say layer up here at the top and followed by the name of that respective layer. What it shows on this screen, if it's just audio, there shouldn't be a visual element, but it should show you a little mini timeline inside the window at the bottom with a green bar usually that represents the total duration of media for that time or that layer. If we want to trim off audio, this is important at the first stage of editing with time-based media, is getting rid of the trash you don't need before you start arranging it in the timeline. So in terms of working with that particular point, we're going to need to trim off the in point and what's called the out point for the layer. So to trim the in point, this will be like taking off excess recorded audio of you maybe dropping your recorder, or your phone, or fiddling with the buttons before you start getting the actual audio you want. which can happen, right? Like that's how we start out recording. To trim off any of that junk, you're going to move your mouse over the head or the endpoint of this green kind of line that overlaps the time ruler. And I'm going to drag it backwards to pull the clip or cut off the media at the front of it. And for this particular clip, I want to get the section that runs between the 5-second and 10-second region. So I'm going to drag my out point, which is the back end of the clip, in to about the 10-second marker. A couple things to notice inside this window, guys. If you see, there are several markers here for time code readouts. So the first one here gives you, the first time code readout tells you the end point time. So it says it starts at 5 seconds into the clip. And then the second time code readout is the actual out point time. So it ends at about 9 seconds into the clip. And then the last set of time code shows you the full duration of the new cut that you've made. So it says it's about mine says it's about 4 seconds long total on my screen. So I've got it cut to a little region, and I can do the playback on it if I want by hitting spacebar. And of course, mine gives me a lovely error like this on screen that says it generated a crash, so it couldn't possibly activate what it needed to do. Bummer. So we're going to see what happens here if it lets it unload past the pinwheel of death. I don't know if it's going to. This will be really sad. Yep, it's really sad. Let's see if it'll reopen where we were. We can be thankful when After Effects does an autosave every 20 minutes, but I don't know if it's been 20 minutes yet. We're going to find out in a minute. I'll have to clip this part out of the, probably out of the video. That's a bummer.
Dang, I have to edit now.
I have to go and edit that now. Maybe I'll leave it in just for fun here. No.
You should do it.
Oh, here we go. Here's this. It's not found. That's terrible. Ultimate fail. All right. Okay. Bunch of nonsense. Hang on a second, guys. I don't like this any more than anybody else does. Y'all can laugh, though, if you want to. It's okay. I get it. It's all right. This is what keeps real screen captures real. So, you know, it's okay. All right, got that loaded back up. It's gonna let me work here, maybe. Just grab these real quick. Grab them back in the timeline. It's a good thing I don't have to use those masks again. Okay. So where was I? Oh yeah, trim clipping. Okay, so I was on module. Here we go. Okay, so we shorten it up. Let's see. I hope it doesn't crash again. That'll be a super bummer. We're gonna save immediately, right? Here we go. Desktop, untitled AEP. Awesome. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to preview it. I'm going to hit spacebar. There we go.
I love that noise.
So it'll loop, again, playing inside this window. You have to remember, you're inside of a layer window. You are not in your main comp right now because it says layer up here across the top of this little panel we're inside of in our main viewing area. Once you've got the clip trimmed down to what you want, now we can actually close this window by clicking on the little X up in the top, and that'll bring our comp window back to the front, which is what we want. And so now we've got our clip trimmed. Now look in the timeline what it did to your clip when we trimmed it. Notice how there are these empty gaps around your little track, your green track out there. So that's just showing you where clip data was removed. The cool thing about digital linear video or nonlinear video editors is that that media is not lost forever. We can actually drag it back out anytime we want to inside the timeline or back in that little layer viewer to change our in and out points as we go. So that flexibility is really awesome in case you mess something up, right? Which often happens when video editing. So now that we have it trimmed, let's actually do this. Let's go ahead and make a duplicate of it so we can kind of loop it and make kind of a repeating pattern of audio for a second. So select the track and then hit Command D. When you hit Command D, it should make an exact duplicate layer right above it. And you can now move that layer around. So I'm just going to stagger it over towards the right so that they play one after the other. Again, when stacking in a timeline, you should always recognize that when audio or media is overlapping each other, that they will play at the same time. But when you have them stair-stepped, in a stair-step kind of visual fashion, they will play one after the other. So now if I listen to my audio, they now play kind of duplicates back to back. Another fun thing we can do with a clip once we've got it out here and we're playing with it, we can also split the track in half based on the position of the playhead over the track. So let's say that I want to trim the audio in half for this particular track at any given point for any reason. So I'll position my playhead, somewhere in the middle of this track. And what I'm going to do to split it, I'm going to hit Shift Command D. So again, that's Shift Command D. And when you do Shift Command D, that will split that selected track in half based on the timeline playhead position over your track audio. And it will give you a brand new layer with the split information on the new layer. So kind of cool. All it really did, again, was it cut the layer in half and made a duplicate. But it shows it with the split section. Kind of neat, right? But that can be really helpful if you're just kind of quickly editing the timeline or trying to cut off media that you don't want after listening to it over and over again. You may hear parts that you just don't need. All right. Now that we have that dropped in, that just kind of gives you an idea of how you can play with it inside of the track. Again, every track in After Effects is always given a new layer position. Every time that you duplicate it, every time you cut it or paste it on screen, that is what happens. It always creates a brand new layer stacking spot for it. Now, let's say we want to add some effects to our audio layer inside of After Effects. Well, that's easy enough to do in here. I'm going to go ahead and select this. There's a layer in here that's called Upright, one of our audio tracks. So I'm going to go to this one called Upright, and I'm going to go over to my Effects and Presets panel over on the right side of the screen. And under Effects and Presets, there is a category that is just for audio. And when I expand audio on that presets panel, it gives me all of the different options in After Effects that I can use to manipulate my audio. Now there's not a whole lot here, but there's enough to play with. So you can use, they've got an effect here for making audio play backwards. You can adjust the bass and treble for the audio. You can add delay. There's other special effects like flange and chorus. So you can get some really wild things. Reverb you can attach to it to make it kind of echo. And you can also add tonal properties to an audio track, which is very bizarre. So there are a lot of these that you can play with very quickly. If you ever want to apply one to an audio clip, you just, again, select the audio clip in your timeline that you want to apply it to. And then you go to your effects and presets, and let's say we add delay. So I'm going to double click on delay. And that will drop the delay effect onto my selected track or my audio track. And it will pop up some properties in two places that I can play with them. The first place that you can play with a special effect property is up in the upper left of your screen. There's a panel for effect controls. And this is where you can just kind of basically adjust values for a given effect. Now I'm going to shorten my workspace area on my timeline, this little render bar, I'm going to drag it back to where it only plays the region of the audio clip that I'm currently have my playhead on. And I'm going to solo the track. Make sure nothing else is soloed, by the way. So I'm going to solo my upright. And I'm going to change up the delay effect by adding, maybe adjusting the delay amount. And then I'm going to preview it. You want to make sure you can hear it also. We'll play with the delay time. Give it a second. And
There is a bass there.
yeah,
It's hiding.
it's in there.
My bass is a water drop.
There we go. A little more intensity on the delay so we can start hearing the effect as we go. So you can start to hear the effect kind of be applied, again, depending on what you're playing with and the needs that you have for your project. Some of these effects may be useful. High and low pass, for instance, may be very useful for cutting off audio that plays below a certain level, or sounds that are unnecessary for a clip that are very low in the background, or high pitched tones can be clipped with a high pass. Again, you have things like stereo mixer that allows you to control which channel your audio plays out of. You can pan it to different speakers through the stereo mixer. It's kind of fun, usually to change up the sensory experience of listening to a sound. But let's say that that's not really enough, right? What if you need to do more fine-tuned control over your audio? Like what if you want to add like some fade-ins or fade-outs? Maybe you want to work with trimming up or enhancing the audio with additional effects. We can actually take this same audio clip and we can send it out of After Effects and into Adobe Audition. So we're going to go ahead and do that with our selected upright clip. I'm going to actually remove the special effect that I applied to it. So I'm going to go down to my upright, go into my properties and delete. Select the word effects and hit delete to get rid of it. And we're going to import this into Audition. So with it selected, go up to the top menu bar and go to Edit and go to Edit in Adobe Audition. Now, once you open up your file, your audio file into Adobe Audition, what it immediately opens you into is the waveform editor. So now what you get is a nice blown up gigantic view of that wave file, which is really super helpful. So you can really see the shape of the audio now and how loud it gets at different points. So this is really helpful at this stage. Let me point out some controls that you can work with and some effects that you can actually access pretty quickly inside of here without having to play around too much in the interface. Again, Adobe Audition is Adobe's sort of audio editing software, so there's a lot of professional grade tools in here that you can use for changing up audio as you see fit. So look over here in the audio form editor where it shows your waveform. And the first tool I want you to notice is there's a little floating graphic controller here. And this allows you to change your audio level on the fly for your piece. Now it gives you several different ways for adjusting the audio levels. You can adjust it by a decimal number or decibel by clicking on the decibel and dragging on the blue text number to initiate a new volume. You can also click and drag on the the little circle that shows like a little pie form circle, so it has a little line that you can adjust the wheel on. So you can adjust your audio levels. It can do plus 15 on decibels or negative 96 for mute.
Question.
Yeah.
When you're splitting stereo, so where it'll play on left and then right.
Yep.
How do you do that in between clips to where you can do it to where it switches smoothly?
So if you're, okay, so the question was, how do you split audio to play more smoothly if it's on stereo? So it's got a left and a right channel. so that it transitions a little better from speaker or from sound to sound. Part of that is working with an envelope fade between the two and making sure that the audio clips actually have some overlapping audio.
Okay.
If they don't, then there's just going to be a dropout no matter what in sound.
Okay.
The moment that there's a gap between them. Now, you can do it in Audition, but you would be working with your audio separately there first. They do have a track editor, a multi-track tool in here for working with that. If you look up here at the top, there's a multi-track option. So you can actually initiate like a brand new multi-track session. And it looks like this. So you can actually drag and drop in as many tracks as you need to overlap and design your audio in After Effects. In Audition, should you choose to do that. But if you're working in After Effects directly, working in it over here is really a matter of, again, getting your audio to where they actually have overlapping parts. It's a little bit harder to work with in After Effects, in my opinion, because you can't see the audio visually very well.
Yeah.
That's where, if you really want to get into fine-tuning it, come into Audition and open this media browser, locate your actual audio files, and just bring them in here and work with them separately in here. And then export out of Audition a track mixdown or multi-track mixdown, and that'll create like an output WAV file or whatever you need to import into After Effects as a single track of audio.
Is there like a blade tool on After Effects at all?
Not really. That's why it's more convenient to work over here. Yeah. That's why I was showing you guys in After Effects. You can split audio and you can cut it by moving the playhead over a chunk of the audio, and then you can split it at that point, delete what you don't need. But this gives you more precision tools for that that are more meaningful for audio development. Okay. But before we get to that, so you have basic audio control with this little floating panel. If you want to create an audio envelope or fade in or fade out over a selected waveform that you're working with, they give you two little halftone squares above the left and top right side of your waveform. So here they are right here, right below the time ruler. My first one is on the left, in the upper left corner of my waveform, and if I move my mouse over it, it'll say fade in. And it'll show a little four-corner black arrow. If I click and drag on that box, I can then drag out onto screen this little yellow line. This represents a fading envelope line. And what a fading envelope actually allows you to do is control audio volume transition into the clip. So in this case, when you drag it to the side, it'll do an automatic adjustment where it's a diagonal line. But if you drag up and down, as you drag it to the left or the right, it will envelope the effect to smoothly transition to the audio. So if you drag it down, you can more quickly cut the audio and make it mute much faster. So notice as you move it across the WAV file that it actually changes the shape of the audio, right? And it's muting it as it goes. So it's showing you a preview of what will get muted or gradually move into over time. Now, this is a very short audio track, so there's not much to gradually fade into. But I can bow this audio effect either way to slightly transition into it by pulling it up, or I can more acutely ramp into the audio by pulling it down. So you get kind of an inversion effect if you need to, if you want to fade in. If you don't, just drag this bar all the way back over. But you can also do it from the back by using the other little halftone box on the back side of the clip. And you can create audio fades that way. You can actively click and drag the playhead in here, and it will give you a scrubbing effect. So it actually plays like live, like the levels of the audio. Notice as you do that down below, the level meter is down here, by the way, at the bottom of your screen in Audition, and that shows you the actual wave levels again, like we had in After Effects. And so the peaking rules still apply. It shows you based on volume. Okay, this is not necessarily based on decibel. So as I drag that up, again, we can start seeing where audio peaks. And again, my audio peaks pretty quick for this file because I changed my decibel level earlier. And it gets loud. It's peaking in the reds, and that's not good. So that means I probably need to drag this thing down to adjust my audio and recheck it. You can always hit spacebar to use your playback in here too, to hear the track play, to preview it. You can do fine trimming in here, by the way. So if you want to actually do like audio trimming inside of Audition, we can do it pretty easily. So I'm going to just select a chunk of audio here to play with. Let's see if I can get out of this. Nope. So I'm going to select the region that I want to keep. So that's where the actual audio plays. So I'm just going to click and drag and select this region inside the window. And once I do that, I can go up to the Edit menu and I can go to Cut. And whoops, it's kind of backwards. Wrong way. I knew better. Hold on a second. What I just did was I actually showed you guys perfectly how to completely remove your audio from the timeline altogether. Don't do that. Aren't you glad that's in the thing, though? It's in the video now. Okay, so let's do it this way instead. Select the chunk you don't want, right? Edit, cut. There we go. Get rid of the stuff you don't need. When there's empty audio here, guys, like this, sometimes it's just not necessary to leave in the design because it's not doing anything for the track. In our case, it does give us the option to get rid of empty space to help refine our track a little bit better. So I'm just clicking and dragging over that section and going to edit and cutting it out completely from the track. And that makes it easier to kind of confine our audio down to a more limited zone so that we can hear the pieces we need. If we want to do more fine-tune adjusting inside here, we can also do things like we can add effects inside of Audition. So these are more fun than they are in After Effects, by the way. More comprehensive. Go to this tab where it says Effects Rack. And that's over here on the left. And the effect rack for this track, it gives you about 16 different channels of effects that you can layer together to enhance your audio. If you ever want to turn one on, you just turn on the little power button next to the number of the effect, that channel that you want to work with, and then go over to the right where there's a little white arrow. And this will give you all of your options to which you can use for applying effects to this specific track. So you've got all kinds of fun stuff, like there's automatic pitch control. You can add actually like guitar distortion effects to an audio clip. You have even more noise reduction options to play with. So if you need to fix audio, there's a way to take out like background hum or do adaptive noise corrections. There's more amplitude adjustments, all kinds of crazy things you can play with in here if you're looking for audio distortions or transformations of any kind. But let's say I want to add something. I'm going to add the guitar suite to this one. So I'm going to go under Special and go to Guitar Suite. And the neat thing about their effects is that you really don't have to know how to control all of these options because they give you this pull down at the top that says Presets. So under Presets, they give you a bunch of, again, sort of default settings for creating different sound effects on the fly. So I'm going to go to one of these, and I'm going to pick Metal Screamer. I love the names that they give special effects in an audio editing application because they're absolutely insane. It's kind of telling of the artist behind the effect. But I'm going to go ahead and pick out Metal Screamer. And when you add the effect, technically speaking, it doesn't just apply it to your audio automatically. You do have to do what's called applying the effect to the channel before you can listen to it. So I'm going to close this little window that popped up. And I'm going to go to my Effects Rack panel. And at the bottom, it says Apply Now because I have an effect. So I'm going to hit Apply. Notice how my audio waveform just completely changed. And now I'm going to initiate a playback, and I'm going to turn my audio down because I have a feeling this is going to be kind of crazy. So now my awesome, smooth, jazzy, upright bass just got a Metallica kind of change done to it overnight, right? Albeit a very dry distortion effect. But instantly I've changed the effect of the audio. Now you can do this with any kind of audio, whether it's a human voice or it's ambient tone from a forest, to kind of change the way that we interpret it and understand it. You can run it through an editor like this and get some very interesting effects on the fly. If you ever want to go further, this is about as far as you can go as far as working with it directly in After Effects like we've been doing. If we hit save now, so I'm going to go to File, Save As, we can actually save the work that we've done to this audio track in Audition and send it directly back to After Effects from where we started editing. I always do this though, is do Save As in Audition and save whatever it creates into your project file so that you don't lose the ability to edit back in Audition for the effects you've applied. So I always save this back to wherever I was working, and I'll say OK. And I'm overwriting because I worked with a file earlier. And now I'm going to go back to After Effects. And I'm going to re-preview this chunk of audio from my upright bass and play it back. Oh, and make sure that you don't have that layer window up. Whoops. So now my audio is updated in After Effects just like I edited in Audition. Pretty sweet. And that's a great deal, though. That's pretty great that you can do a round trip edit like that without needing to go to Audition only, import your audio, edit it, export it again, re-import it into After Effects to use it. So for single track editing, it works great. But if you ever want to design and score your own stuff, like really play with the audio, you may want to work directly in in Audition, with a multi-track session. And inside there, you can actually import your audio clips directly and work with them inside of the system. Again, which is a completely different way to work with the audio. But here, if I was going to do it, I could expand down my in my media browser, come into my Mac HD in this case, and find where my audio is stored, and import it and arrange it as I need. And I can drag the track into the multi-track session. And here I can preview that. Okay, that gets really loud. That's a sine wave test. But those are actually audio that you can find from Audition. It has a whole download page of free audio from Adobe, chocked full of effects, audio loops, and all kinds of things. But you can arrange audio very easily on the timeline in here, and you can see it visually. You can adjust panning and audio controls here, and you can layer it and stack it just like we were in After Effects, but only dealing with the audio instead. So it's much easier to line stuff up and arrange it. The other beauty is that I can actually do finer tuned cutting and editing in here of my audio. Love that tone. Sounds like something out of the 80s. So you can play with that in here much more effectively, like whether you wanted to trim audio. Well, they have better tools for that in here. Like they have a razor blade tool up at the top toolbar that you can actually just cut directly on the line, and you can separate your audio into two regions. Pretty easy. You also have direct control over the fades on the track itself. So if I want to create a crossfade, I can actually overlap the track media like this and see how it shows a little crossfade. So now I can actually create overlapping audio really easily. And do all this stuff inside here. Again, it's much more powerful if you're just trying to work with the audio and orchestrate it separately this way if you need to. Our project does lend itself to that because I do tell you to work with the audio first. If you do that, and you work in here, right, like you bring in your audio assets like one by one, dragging them in here as you need them, and placing them in their own respective track regions on this side of the screen. Whenever you're done arranging and working with media in here, you just go to export it out. You go to File, Export, and you go to Multi-Track Mixdown, and you do Entire Session. So that will take any clips that you've dropped into this thing, and it will ask you a couple questions here like, hey, where do you want to save it? What format do you want it in? If you want my opinion, when saving output formats, use one that's called uncompressed or that's understood as an uncompressed. AIFF is considered an uncompressed format. That's why it's listed first, not just because of its spelling. I recommend using that one first. That will directly import into After Effects for you. You can obviously use other options, like they have MP3 and WAV if you want to export your audio for either of those formats as well. WAV is it's in between, yeah. So it's not bad. I'll put it that way. But you can have that set up, and that's all you really need to do. After that, you just say OK, and export it to wherever, and it will give you that format file for you to import into After Effects to use as your audio layer. And that can be kind of helpful for getting your audio really well designed inside here instead of trying to do it inside of After Effects. But if you're not trying to do anything really complex with After Effects for audio adjustment, then After Effects is probably your best bet. But that's working with it. Again, just kind of briefly talking about working in Audition. Again, Audition is an audio editor, so it does work a little differently. But it's not too complicated necessarily compared to working with the timeline we've already introduced. But that is how you work with audio inside the system. There are more things that we can do after this when trying to synchronize up with video and animation, but that's something we'll talk about when we get to the second part of the exercise, when we look at working with video footage and graphic assets, as well as working with more advanced animation. So that concludes this part of the exercise. Again, always review your documents that you've made or notes for your file and your own work so that you know where you need to go with your audio, how you need to arrange it, what you're trying to work towards for your end goal at the end of the day. All right.